line. When you are ready to begin the presentation, press the Start Broadcast button on the GoToWebinar control panel to allow all attendees to hear you. This system will notify you once you begin your broadcast. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mick Skerritt. I'm representative of the executive group for the REC drivers. We're here doing our first drivers webinar today. You will find as part of this presentation and webinar there is a dashboard to one side. Can we just check at this point that everybody can hear us? If you can respond through, and we know that we can see. Yeah, we can see everybody's coming through now. During the webinar and through the presentation, if you have any questions that you would like answering either at the end or if we have the possibility during, if you can use that chat functionality within the dashboard to put those through, please. So on today's agenda, there'll be just a short section by myself, Mick Skerritt. I work for Manpower. Just a little bit of the challenges we're addressing today in the marketplace as recruiters. There will be a section from Policy and Campaigns update from Tom Hadley from the REC, and then a legal update from Bunmi Adife. Everybody's in the room with us today, so we will move swiftly through. We have an hour for this. There will be an opportunity to download this afterwards as well if you want to play it back. Moving swiftly through the first slides. We have some big challenges in our industry at the moment in alignment with the logistics and the drivers industry. Brexit, without going into too much detail, I know everything that's happening at the moment is having an impact on the industry, which aligns to some of the other points that I've put into my slides. Driver CPC, the grandfather rights for the majority of the driver stock will be up in September of this year. On the horizon, we still have IR35, and we're seeing our clients being a lot more sophisticated and some buying changes across the industry as well. The driver shortage overall continues. They're continually at the top of the table in terms of the hardest people to recruit anywhere within the UK. That age, despite many initiatives to try and get people into the industry, continues to rise. It's almost a cycle of pain at the moment that the more logistics companies try to drive efficiency and maximize drivers' hours, the less opportunity there is for diverse workforce solutions to come into place. There's still only 2% under 25 of passing the test and getting into the industry, and that experience gap has been an issue. And as we discussed about Brexit, there is 1 in 7 EU drivers still within the country. While we highlight female drivers at the bottom, there is a struggle with diversity in general across the industry to get young, female, ethnic minorities, ethnic diversity into the industry as a whole. And the outlook currently, we're seeing some changes in buying behaviours and changes in strategy within the industry. The logistics industry, the transport industry's hiring intentions continue to be at a minus figure. They're not looking towards investing in recruitment. What they've done is stocked up in preparation, like they've done with a lot of their hardware, and put a lot more permanent in place. And this has been a continuing trend over the last 4 quarters. It's on the horizon. Christmas peak supply is just round the corner, and that window gets smaller as well. The availability of work is very, very tight within that window of December, early November, and it rolls through. And those regional hotspots as well continue to be highlighted. The Northwest, the Midlands as a whole, East London, all high recruitment areas for us, which is changing this consumer buying, our clients buying in different ways in terms of their contingent workforce. The industry is looking to change. They're definitely investing in apprenticeships and skills improvement. They're looking towards youth engagement and where they're going to get the next generation of drivers from. How can they make the industry more attractive? The solutions are becoming very different and diverse. High investment in some of the academies like Eddie Stobart's and DHL, down to the smaller companies going out and buying training on the high street to try and augment and supplement their driver supply, and hoping as well that technology will take some improvement in the workaday. There's a lot more tracking systems in place, in-cab technology, different things for older drivers to come to grips with. The new technology isn't always seen as being favourable in the marketplace with the older driver these days when it comes down to the adaptive cruise controls and things like that, which has made for some interesting challenges in recruitment, which is where we all come in. I did say it was going to be short from me. At this point, I'd like to hand over to Tom Hadley, the REC.
Great. Thanks, Mick. That was a really cracking intro, actually, and I'll pick up on some of those themes around workforce and buying behaviours in particular. Actually, so one of the things I'll touch on is the latest feedback from our good recruitment campaign. So that really set things up nicely. So this is really just a quick horizon scan, a quick overview. In terms of market developments, you probably will see the report on jobs. I mean, the trend has been the same for the last few months to some extent. Demand remains strong, especially in the logistics sector. The challenge is finding enough staff to meet that demand. We do have a regional version of report on jobs, which shows a few differences if you're interested to take a look at that. As a slight aside, I know there's a lot of interest in more regional, local data. We do have a partnership agreement with MZ, organisation who's producing some really good, very specific local jobs market data for members. So that will be coming at you quite soon. So that whole regional focus is a big part of our work as well at the REC. I guess the other trends we pick up is, starting salaries continue to increase. So that's one of the responses in staff shortage sectors is to increase pay. Anecdotally, though, we're seeing a lot of people think of other things which aren't pay related to sort of attract and keep people on their books. Yesterday's official jobs market data again shows we're at record employment just about. So again, even though we've seen a bit of a levelling off, and report on jobs shows that a slight downward trend in permanent hiring, the feedback from members, particularly in logistics and sectors linked to it, the challenge is one of supply. So labour market trends are there. The other report that we do, and this ties in with something Mick was saying, is the looking ahead piece. So Jobs Outlook comes out again every month, but we're asking employers, not recruiters, the questions, and we're asking employers what they're planning to do. And there we've seen, obviously, business confidence has been impacted, perhaps no surprise there. But two messages that we do get through is people are looking for flexible solutions. So across quite a lot of sectors, people are saying, actually, we are a bit cautious about perm hiring, but flexible staffing might be something we look into more. The other, and perhaps really interesting for this sector, is employers are saying what we're looking for from our recruitment partners increasingly is about expertise. So yes, can you deliver the staff that we need, but can you give us advice on some of the regulatory changes that Mick mentioned? Can you give us perhaps advice and strategic guidance on some of the areas linked to regional workforce dynamics, etc. So we think that's an opportunity for recruiters. Again, if you use the little boxes on the side to give us some comments and feedback, there's already quite a few coming in from Gwen. Interesting point about insurance providers there, around youth engagement actually. So that's a good point. I'll touch on that in a bit. That's a question from Tina around how can we do that, and how can we be proactive in that sort of space. So a good question. So as I go along, I'm interested to get your views on things. Oh yes, sorry, there's an update thing that we need to snooze. So I think somebody pointed that out. I don't know what's happening there to the slide deck, and it's gone. Great, so thanks for doing that, Temi. So a couple of points there we thought was interesting from Jobs Outlook, which is what employers are looking for from their recruitment partners. Again, is that true in the logistics space? Would you say is that a trend that you're seeing? So your clients asking you slightly different questions, not just about the operational service that you provide. Is it something that people are asking you about, things like regulatory developments, IR35? Mick, is that something that you see at all when you speak to clients?
Definitely seeing that at the moment, where our client base is wanting to talk beyond just the transactional recruitment and look for some more of the insight into what's happening outside. The big story at the moment is IR35 and how that's going to impact the industry as a whole and themselves, because there's so many solutions that include the self-employed driver.
Yeah, okay, spot on. So that's interesting. Again, keen to hear your views on that. And again, a big part of the work at the RAC is to give our members, the tools. So whether it's like the latest research, latest data, the latest legal guidance that we'll come on to in a little while, so that you can use that in your interaction with clients. But interesting, any trends that you're seeing, any questions that are coming up from your clients that are perhaps slightly out of the ordinary? We'd be keen to get your feedback on that. In terms of how firms across the economy are responding to staff shortages, no surprises really, but there's a mix of responses employers are looking at. So looking at the channels that they're using. Obviously, when you've got a recruitment challenge, retention becomes a big one. So looking at the training side of things. Wages is one response. But I thought this was an interesting one, and some of the recent discussions we've had with employers, a lot of it's about the non-wage benefits. How do we use that to attract and retain people, and in automation being a factor as well. So again, this is CBI data, so a big part of our work at the REC is to engage with employers, but business organisations, so that we can get access to their data in terms of what employers, i.e. your clients, are doing at the moment. So that was just a quick snapshot of the hiring market. In terms of client candidate expectations, so this ties in with Mick's points about buying behaviour. So as you perhaps know, one of our big campaigns at the REC is the Good Recruitment campaign. So if you're not aware of it, check it out on the website, but it's the one that we aim it squarely at your clients, at employers. So agencies can't sign up to it, but it creates a channel for us to have ongoing dialogue and engagement with the employer community. And what it helps us to do is to filter out intelligence and things that we can give back to our members, which hopefully helps you in your own conversations with clients. And these are just some of the trends from the last couple of months. I put it together as a short list of 8 key themes. So yes, workforce planning issues are a board level priority. Brexit has made that even more so. People looking ahead, and to some extent business models are under threat because of the lack of staff. So that's definitely been a change that we've seen. Having said that, the feedback we get from some employers is, whilst it's a big priority, we really have to work hard to make the internal case for investing more in our recruitment. So it sounds like that sounds perhaps a bit counterintuitive. If people are recognising it's a challenge, and yet those internal discussions are not easy, and that's one of the areas that we pick up from the Good Recruitment campaign. Employers having to make that case, and it's not easy to make it and get the extra investment on employer brand, etc. Which leads us on to this point about employer brand. So larger employers are doing some really interesting stuff on projecting themselves. Again, it's trying to tap into the inclusion agenda. So some of the big employers who sign up to the campaign in logistics, if you look at their websites, they got some pretty good videos with women drivers in there. So trying to role model, trying to do things a little bit differently. We've seen quite a big overlap at the moment between, and it's perhaps not a new phenomenon, but it's definitely increasing between the employer brand and the consumer brand. And marketing teams working closely with recruitment teams to develop some quite snazzy campaigns to attract people to their organisation. Other bits of feedback, a time when things are very tight, will SMEs and public sector potentially be left behind? Possibly. That's something that we look at in our ongoing work. On inclusion, so yes, we know it's hard to make a difference, but a lot of employers we speak to through the campaign are saying, we're looking for solutions, and we think that's a real opportunity for recruitment providers. As I said, we've got some new ideas, we've got some contacts, perhaps with local charities, etc. We can perhaps work with you to help make a difference. Upping the ante on the management of contingent workforce is quite a recent theme, but it would be good to get your feedback on that. So let me try to summarise the discussions that we've been having with employers as part of the campaign. A lot of it's about employer brand. It's about being seen to be a great place to work and all that good stuff. And people start to realise actually it makes no sense for us to do all of this, work if we're not at the same time managing our contingent temporary contract workforce with respect, etc. So people are starting to look at this. I'd say it's quite early days, but that whole thing of perhaps bringing the contingent workforce into that mix when you're talking about reputation and being a good place to work. So we'd be quite interested to get any examples from you guys about clients doing anything differently. So whether it's about upping the ante on how you manage the staff, is it about getting feedback more from temporary contract interim staff through surveys? So any examples of your clients doing things differently when it comes to the temporary contract workforce? It'd be great to get examples of that. There is an appetite for new approaches, new technology. So how's that changing the game in many sectors? And as I mentioned, the opportunity for us as employers saying to us, we are looking externally for expertise. Recruitment's getting harder. We need to sort of tap into to not just our views, but trying to get some external perspectives. These are just some of the employers that sign up to the Good Recruitment campaign. So again, just to be clear, agencies can't sign up to it, but you can use this as leverage. So we are encouraging our members, flag the campaign to your clients. It's free. So it's a nice little hook to say, as a client of ours, you're able to join the REC's Good Recruitment campaign, etc. There's some quite well-known brands in there. For us, it gives us a good channel. It gives some good intel, and one of the messages we do try and take forward is one example of good recruitment practice is working with good recruitment providers. So we do use the campaign to drive clients towards REC members who are doing all the right stuff on compliance, etc. So if there are clients you think would be interested, we also any Stovards in here, DHL for example. So there's some big brands in there, but any clients you think would be interested, do get in touch. Perhaps we perhaps send us to follow up the little hook that we use to get people involved in. So it's a nice engagement piece, and for us, it drives employers to us. Our aim is to hit 500 by the end of this year, which we will do. We're over just getting up to 450 employers have signed up so far. So it's a really important campaign for us moving forward. So final few slides from me. I thought I'd just give you some feedback on that theme of buying behaviours and client perspective from Trek. So that's our big set piece. It's the one time of the year we bring together in-house recruitment teams and our members. So there was just under 300 people in that room, just around the corner here in Covent Garden. We will be doing the same event next year, so keep a lookout for it. So it's a really good event, and we do lots of little breakout sessions, round tables, and it's a good conversation, and it's an opportunity to engage with clients, as well as hearing from leading business leaders, etc. A couple of things that came out, so in terms of the top topics that employers wanted to discuss, so these are just some of the whole onboarding piece, probably more linked to permanent recruitment, so how do you bring people in and induct them, etc. Inclusion, again, a big theme, and Mick mentioned some of the challenges in the logistics sector on that one. This was a big theme, actually, the whole well-being and mental health piece. So that would be, I know there's quite a lot of good practice happens in the driving sector from good agencies, how they look after the workers on their books, etc. Some of this just flagged up. Let me see if I can get rid of that. Good. So again, examples of that. Are you doing anything interesting with the workers on your books in terms of their own well-being, their own mental health? Again, we'd be quite keen to capture some little case studies of that, and I'll work with Chris on that to capture. So if you've got any good stories, that would be great. Retention is obviously a big brand. I've talked about employer brand. Looking at the future, so preempting future needs was a big theme. How do you select? Again, AI as part of the selection process was a big topic. And the bigger picture, what that meant was really looking at the politics and some of the big drivers of change in the jobs market. So these are the topics that clients wanted to talk about. And one presentation I thought was interesting to mention is Tony Dank, who's one of the keynote speakers at the conference, talked a lot about competitiveness and productivity. So yes, leadership and management being a big part of that, pace, agility, digital adoption, and this idea of connectivity, so how employers can come together to exchange views on different things, which is the aim of the Good Recruitment campaign. But I thought a lot of what he talked about was relevant to us, our members as businesses in their own rights, especially around the leadership and management piece. But also it helps to focus about how some of your clients perhaps are moving forward. What are they doing to boost productivity? And incidentally, one of the big themes of our work this year is looking to really try and draw that link between good recruitment practice, whether it's perm or temp contract, and productivity. So trying to draw that link out. Again, one of our aims is to raise awareness of recruitment as a discipline, why it's important to get recruitment right, as well as recruitment as an industry. So I thought that was quite an interesting piece. So before I finish on other external challenges, so interesting, Richard's coming back with a point here about IR35 being a hot topic. Exactly, and I think a lot of the work we do at the RSC is almost giving you the tools to have those sort of conversations. And do come to us if there's questions that come up through clients that you're not sure. On the youth employment side, I might mention that a little bit further down the line, but there's definitely some work we're trying to do here at the REC. We've got a network we're calling our Future Jobs Ambassadors network. It's all about encouraging our members to go into schools, to go into local universities, etc. But the school piece is very important. We've done a few ourselves just to test it, and it's interesting because you end up on these career days in schools, shoulder to shoulder with leading employers in the area. So it's a nice little networking thing as well. So we'll definitely send a link to that, and we think there's a really good message of the industry about us, being proactive and reaching out, trying to bring new generations of workers into the logistics sector. So we'll definitely send you some information on the Future Jobs Ambassadors scheme. Mick, I think there's a point you wanted to pick up.
Just on the youth engagement piece as well, there is an industry connection into a charitable force called Think Logistics that's sponsored by a lot of those companies that you see or you saw on the slide before. They're there to try and support that youth development into the industry and get younger people interested in logistics as a whole, as well as being drivers.
Yeah.
And that's a good connection network piece for any agency provider to be involved with.
So maybe we'll take that as an action, Chris and myself, perhaps to look at how we build a link to that. So a lot of our work around youth employment and building that bridge, it's about being brokers essentially. So there's a lot of organisations doing some great stuff. So we just want to make sure our members can tap into that. We partner with the Inspiring the Future scheme, for example. So we've got a separate link that you register with, and they make it happen. So they ensure that schools then contact you, say we're doing a careers day next month, would you come in, etc. So we are trying to make it as easy as possible, but as I said, it becomes a really good news story for our industry about us trying to really make a difference in the sector. So
there's a point that came in early there about driver CPC grandfather rights. Yeah, as a whole, grandfather rights ended in 2014, but that window of all those older drivers, where there is a majority still, they expire this September in terms of their driver CPC qualifications, which could have an impact in terms of leavers assessing their ongoing careers, which could have an impact that there's not as much interest in the driver CPC window as there was the first time round, but it's definitely going to have an impact as we get to September, and maybe that residual training ramps up and maybe causes an impact in terms of driver availability.
Right. And there's a couple of other points here being made, so some great input here from members, which is great to see. Tina mentions the point, actually, yes, so building that bridge and encouraging more people into the sector is fine, but then it's about clients accepting to take on younger workers. And there's a point in some ways linked to that from Anne about actually one of the barriers is obviously the insurance barrier. So there are perhaps some policy issues for us to take forward, as well as being proactive in working with schools, etc. So some really good points there. As I say, if you've got any examples of changing attitudes to the contingent temporary workforce, just drop us a little line on that, because we're quite keen to sort of capture examples of employers recognising that how we treat our contingent workforce is important, and we'd like to see some examples of that. And if there isn't, that would be good to hear as well.
In terms of the insurance, it is an interesting challenge at the moment that lots of logistics companies, the larger scale ones, have got some form of warehouse to wheels development program in terms of license acquisition, which means that they've got lower experience but putting them into their vehicles, and yet they're still looking towards the agency drivers to have this 2 years experience capture within the requirement. whether it's either contractual with the agency that they're engaged with, etc. But there are some of those walls coming down now.
Okay, interesting. So do keep sending us your comments and views. That's really useful for us to hear. So just to conclude on some of the external challenges, obviously, Brexit remains a big concern for the business community. Of course, it does. As you may be aware, we're rolling out a whole series of regional Brexit workshops, which some of you guys have been attending. So we're in Cambridge last week, the week before in Belfast. Our colleague Kate's in Bristol tomorrow. So really taking the workshop up and down the country. And a lot of this isn't necessarily about the politics. It's more about workforce planning, etc. We have external speakers from Fragment, who are probably the world's leading immigration experts. So they give you some great advice on settled status issues, for example, as well as looking ahead at what a future immigration strategy might look like. And we have KPMG who talk a lot about how other leading businesses are planning for Brexit, what contingency plans are they putting in place, and how some businesses are looking overseas to different markets. And one of the polls that we did at one of our Brexit webinars was interesting. Over 15% of our members, that's quite a big number of agencies, definitely looking at overseas markets to spread the risk actually of Brexit. So these are just some of the Brexit scenarios. We're obviously keeping abreast of what's happening on the politics. If there was a no deal, how would that impact? What sort of support would we offer to members to help through that? If there's a general election, of course, we'll be in manifesto mode, bringing out our key messages to the fore. So a lot of these scenarios remain on the table. We'd have thought would have moved on from when we put this together. But do take a look at the Brexit Hub on the website if you're interested in any of the information we're doing there. One of the messages we've been trying to take forward is yes, Brexit's front of mind for many. But there's lots of other things happening around immigration. Boom's going to talk about the Good Work Plan, IR35 we know about. Some of the work we're doing about procurement. We're about to launch in the next few weeks a piece of research on the apprenticeship levy. So how do we make that work better for people on temporary contracts? Can we use that perhaps as a way of bringing people into different sectors? So there's a big piece of work we're doing on that coming up. So keep an eye out for some of those other priorities. And I thought I'd just conclude with this look ahead piece. So as you probably have seen, some of our work at the RSC is trying to look ahead to preempt some of the big changes in different markets like the logistics sector. So we launched this report a couple of years ago. It was actually chaired by Esther McVey, who may or may not be the next Prime Minister of this country. We'll have to keep an eye out for that. But there was some big messages there around inclusion. This idea of progression nation. So again, you might have seen Amber Rudd, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, was in our offices about 3 weeks ago talking about her drive for getting people into sectors, but helping them to progress in sectors. This idea of becoming a real progression nation. So that's something we talked about in our initial Future Jobs Commission report. Seems to have gained traction with government, which is good to see. The education piece, again, that's great that you guys have picked up on that, but that was a big theme of our work when we first put that report out. Better skills matching, a recruitment revolution. So what we mean by that is companies actually quite radically changing the way they hire and looking at different methods, different criteria, etc. Being ready for disruption. So again, that comes to the sector piece. Where do we think the logistics sector is going over the next few years? What does that mean for us? And the good work agenda. And this final one kind of ties in with what I was talking about, of capturing examples of good and potentially bad practice about how you treat people. So good work, there's a regulatory agenda that Boomi will talk about, but a lot of it, is very basic. So when I spoke to members recently in the hospitality sector, say some of it's about people don't want to come into work and be shouted at anymore. The culture's changing. It's about how people feel in work, and some of it's quite basic. So again, that good work agenda is something that we think we can run with and use to amplify. A lot of the work we did around the future jobs was turning it back in terms of what it means for us, and one of the key conclusions of one of the white papers we've done is this idea of a more strategic relationship between clients and their recruitment partners, and that's something that we're quite keen to accelerate. If you haven't seen any of these white papers, it's all on the website, so there's a separate part looking at the future jobs remit. And just to conclude then with our 4 campaigning themes, so a lot of what we talk about at the RSC will fit within one of these 4 categories. So showing that good work and flexible contracts go hand in hand. We think that's really important. Again, it's part of the good work agenda. There is a feeling that if we did have a Labour government, would be in the firing line. So we do need to be proactive about showing that just because people aren't in permanent full-time work doesn't mean that they're being exploited. A lot of this is choice of the worker. So we need to be quite proactive again in showing that message that good work and flexibility go hand in hand. demonstrated that brilliant recruitment is at the heart of the economy so that it drives growth. We think it's a really important part of our work. And the assumption there is if we do get more people to recognise recruitment as a discipline, we start to get more recognition for recruitment as an industry. So that's a big part of the work, and there'll be some bespoke research coming out on that, drawing that link. Creating the right environment for great recruiters to thrive. So this is partly about the regulatory environment that Bhumi will talk about. It's also about this level playing field agenda, and we are really passionate about driving good compliance, but also good government enforcement, so that the good guys, people who are investing and making the right changes, aren't undercut by people who are not doing any of the things they should be doing. And that final one we touched on is taking the lead on the future jobs and looking ahead. So that was a very quick run through. Perhaps a final introductory thought was it never gets easier, we can just get better. And that's part of our message at the REC, is we think the jobs market will continue to be a challenge, but we just need to sort of work together and get better. And for us, there's real opportunities there. The more employers are finding it hard, the more opportunity there is for our sector to step in. And this is just a final slide, just a quick update. I won't talk through over all the areas, but there is the Brexit Hub, IR35 Hub as well. We've got regular webinars to listen to on a lot of these topics. Do think about the GRC, so could you use that as a way of engaging with your clients and drive people towards us? We think that would be quite good. The IRP Awards, so now one thing we're really keen to do is to showcase good practice in the logistics sector and the driving sector. So if you haven't thought about it, do try and enter the awards, because one, it gives you good recognition as a business. Chris and myself will capture some of those examples and use them as case studies. So again, there's a real benefit, for you guys to get involved and to enter the awards, and we will really try and maximise the benefits actually by showcasing some of the great work that's happening in the driving sector in recruitment. So if you haven't thought about it, do have a look at the IRP Awards and enter. That would be great. We're hosting a Future Jobs Summit looking ahead at some of these technology changes on November the 6th, and the Future Jobs Ambassadors, there's an opportunity to get involved there, so we'll send the link round so that you can tap into that. We've got nearly 200 members already signed up, which is great. We're looking to get 300 by the end of the year. So thanks a lot for your comments. There's a few more coming in, but do keep sending the questions and comments. And again, I'll be working with Chris very closely on a lot of the policy topics that we discussed, as well as the ongoing campaigning work. So thanks a lot for listening, and again, thanks a lot for your feedback. I'm going to hand over now to Bhumi, who will take us through some of the good work changes. Thanks again.
Thank you, Tom. So I'm going to start off with the Good Work Plan. I'm sure some of you are quite familiar with the Matthew Taylor Review. And as we all know, government wants to embrace change and recognises the strength of having a flexible workforce in the UK. And as a result, that led to the Matthew Taylor Review. So he reviewed modern working practices back in 2016. In 2017, he came up with around 53 recommendations, and then a consultation took place in 2018 covering 4 areas. Government considered measures to increase transparency in the labour market, employment status, the agency worker regulations, and the enforcement of employment rights. And we, the REC, responded to all consultations, and now we've received 4 statutory instruments. And these are legislative changes that are going to come into force predominantly on 6th of April 2020. So I'm going to talk you through each statutory instrument, and please feel free to send your comments and questions as I go along. So for the first change, we're looking at the agency worker regulations, and I'm sure this is something you're quite familiar with in the sector. So just by way of background, under Regulation 7, if an agency worker works for the same hirer in the same role for 12 weeks, they're entitled to equal treatment. And equal treatment includes equal pay. However, if you, the agency, as a temporary work agency, issues a Swedish derogation contract, which is known as a Regulation 10 contract, under the agency worker regulations, to your worker, because you're engaging them as an employee, rather than on a contract for services, that's when the Swedish derogation model applies. Now, this Swedish derogation model will be repealed as of next year. Therefore, you can no longer issue Regulation 10 contracts. So, as we know under Regulation 10, if they do have a permanent contract of employment with you, the agency, that individual is waiving their rights to equal pay. you can no longer apply those contracts, as I said earlier, from the 6th of April 2020, because it's going to be repealed. So that means if an agency worker has qualified for equal treatment, as of the 6th of April 2020, they will be entitled to receive equal pay. Now, the legislation states that the employment business must actually issue a written statement to your agency workers who's qualified no later than the 30th of April 2020, confirming that they're now entitled to receive equal pay. The legislation goes further by stating that if the temporary work agency, you, the employment business, does not comply with the requirements above, where you don't give equal pay to a qualified agency worker, they can actually issue proceedings and claim compensation from an employment tribunal. And also, they should not be unfairly dismissed or subjected to a detriment simply because they're now entitled to equal pay and want to receive equal pay. So bear this in mind, that as of next year, you can no longer issue Swedish derogation contracts, and qualified agency workers, even under contract of employment, will be entitled to receive equal pay. So I'll now move on to the second statutory instrument, and it's titled the Employment Rights, Employment Particulars and Paid Annual Leave Amendment Regulations 2018. Now, this is a change to legislation that comes into force in two parts. The first point is around written statements. We all know that under the Employment Rights Act, an employee should receive a written statement from the employer within 2 months of being employed. And that will set out specific information about the contractual relationship between the parties. Now, receiving a written statement becomes a day one right as of the 6th of April 2020. And that written statement that you, the employer, must give to the employee must include specific information, such as what's stated on the slide here. Days and times the individual will be required to work, the duration of the contract. So if you've got a fixed term contract for about 3 or 6 or 9 months, you must stipulate that duration, any notice periods, all remuneration, not just pay. So entitlements to sick leave and pay, any of the family-friendly rights, training entitlements, and also duration and conditions attached to any probation periods. So that information must be provided in the written statement. We've got a couple of comments here, so I'm just going to try and read them and answer. Yes, a question has come through saying, is there any ACAS/REC data about equal pay claims? Well, we don't have any data present about equal pay claims. And I think it's more the Equalities and Human Rights Commission that might have such information. So it's something that we might look into or try and look into for you. Now, the second element with regards to the statutory instrument is around holiday pay. So we all know that under the working time regulations, Regulation 16 stipulates the pay reference period when you're calculating holiday pay. And that's because with temporary workers, typically on a contract for services, the hours and times in which they work typically change. So they don't have fixed hours into their contract. So for the purpose of calculating holiday pay, you have to look back on the last 12 weeks to get an average. Now, the 12-week average is going to change from 12 weeks to 52 weeks as of the 6th of April next year. And the reason why government is doing this, we suspect, is because they want to get more of an accurate reflection of the amount of time agency workers are actually working. But in the consultation, we, the REC, did raise the fact that a lot of agency workers don't typically work for 52 weeks, they work for less. So basically the default position is that if the worker hasn't worked for 52 weeks, you look at the number of weeks they've worked and get the average from that number of weeks to calculate the holiday pay. Now, quickly move on to the third, actually, statutory instrument. And just before I go on to that, there was another comment. Yes, a comment stating employment particulars day one info. Sorry. What if days and times of work are variable week on week? What if we are unsure as to the length of the assignment? But please bear in mind that the written statement of particulars is for employees. So if they engage by you, you would have that information. And yes, it is going to come into force for workers, but what you can provide is confirmation that there isn't actually a fixed period. It will vary, but you will know what the contractual hours should be, depending on who they're working for. Now, I'll go on to the third statutory instrument. It's the Employment Rights Miscellaneous Amendment Regulations. This comes into force into two parts as well. So the first amendment is to the Employment Tribunals Act of 1996. And what government has done is actually increased the penalty available for a breach of a worker's employment rights from £5,000 to £20,000, which is quite steep. And I believe the reason behind that is that the government believes that increasing the penalty would result in employers complying with the legislation a lot more and not risking breaching employees' rights. And we'll see whether or not that actually takes effect. But £20,000 is quite a lot of money. And the second element, in terms of the amendments to the statute, in terms of the statutory instrument, is around written statements. We've talked about that for employees. That's also applicable to workers, because you know we can engage workers on contracts of employment. We talked about Swedish derogation contracts. You could have 0 hours contracts, and these workers could be your employees. So again, that becomes a day one right from the 6th of April 2020, where you must provide a written statement to your workers as of the 6th of April 2020 from day one. Now, before I move on to the last statutory instrument, I just want to address a question that's come in around Swedish derogation. So the question is, when we convert the worker on a Swedish derogation to a standard PAYE contract, will the Swedish derogation contract termination clauses be considered inoperable? In other words, we will not have to pay the Swedish derogation termination payment. So basically what the position is around the Swedish derogation contracts and termination is that anything you do before the 6th of April 2020 has to comply with the provisions under Regulation 10 of the Agency Worker Regulations. So that means before the 6th of April, if there are periods when the individual is not working, you have an obligation to find work for the individual, offer work, or pay between assignments. So that's still applicable up until the 6th of April. After that, that falls away. So just bear that in mind. The key time that obligation will no longer be applicable is the 6th of April 2020. So I hope that answers that question. So I'll move on to the last statutory instrument. And we all know, and I'm sure in the sector you're very, very familiar with the conduct regulations, which is one of the key pieces of legislation that governs how employment businesses, employment agencies provide their services to clients and work seekers, and there's going to be a fundamental change out of the 6th of April 2020. Now, there's going to be a new requirement under a Regulation 13A, where you, the employment business, must give your work seekers and candidates a key information document before they enter into a contract with your business. Now, the purpose behind requiring this key information document is to address the lack of transparency that we now see in very complex supply chains. We've moved away from having traditional models where you simply have a worker, the employment business, the client in the supply chain. You have various intermediaries like umbrella companies, people providing their services through PSCs and other intermediaries. And sometimes it actually muddies the waters because workers don't know who they're engaged by, who's responsible for paying them, or what they're entitled to receive. So in order to address that, government has introduced this key information document, and your obligations as the employment business would differ depending on how the worker is engaged. Now, if the worker is on your PAYE payroll, you must provide very specific information. It states you must stipulate that it's actually a key information document at the top of the page of the document. Apologies, is rather prescriptive, but bear with me. You must also state the purpose of the document, basically explaining the contractual relationship between yourself and the worker. You must also confirm where additional information can be found, if there is additional information. So if you've got something on your website, let them know. You must provide the contact details of the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate, and that's because they're the statutory body that's responsible for enforcing the conduct regulations. You must confirm the type of contract that the worker will be engaged on. You must confirm the identity of yourself, the employment business, or who's responsible for paying the work seeker, and also the rate of pay you expect to achieve for them. You must also confirm intervals at which they will be paid, any deductions to their pay, so if there are any costs and also if they've got to pay for any goods and services, what those fees will be. Any non-monetary benefits, annual leave entitlements, and a representative statement that illustrates the remuneration that the agency worker can expect to achieve. So that's basically in the form of a draft payslip. Now, if you are engaging an individual who's providing their services through an intermediary, maybe an umbrella company or PSC, all the information that I mentioned in the last 2 slides must be provided in the key information document, together with additional information. And the key addition is the fact that you've got to explain the difference in the pay. So what you, the employment business, is going to be paying the intermediary, so the umbrella company or the PSC, that gross sum, and also what the net sum the individual is going to receive. And that will give them the opportunity to make an informed decision as to whether or not they want to provide their services through that intermediary and address transparency. So I'll quickly move on to the next slide. Now, the reason why this key information document is quite important in the sector is because there's typically a high level of opt-out of the conduct regulations. Am I right, Mick? And do you, the drivers... Okay.
You'd be better asking Tom that one, but he doesn't know.
Okay, so I think that probably is a high level of opt-out of the conduct regulations in the driving sector. But however, please bear in mind that employment business, there's no opt-out for the work seeker or the limited company out of this requirement under Regulation 13A. So the employment business must comply with providing this key information documents, regardless of whether or not the work is eventually going to opt out of the conduct regulations. Now, the requirements are rather prescriptive, and you can see from the information I provided earlier that there's a lot to provide before the contract is actually agreed. But we, the REC, are working closely with government to ensure you have a template document to use and guidance to support you through the process to make it more straightforward. Because it's government want to ensure that you, the employment business, provides the information in a clear and succinct manner, and is presented on 2 sides of A4 paper that's not more than 210 by 295 millimeters dimensions. I can't understand the reasoning behind that, but that's what they've stipulated in the legislation. And also, please ensure that you keep a copy of the key information documents on your records, just in case you're subject to an inspection. Now, there are other elements of the Good Work Plan on slides, but I think for time, I'm going to skip through those slides, if that's okay, and kindly read them in your spare time. If you've got questions, you can email the Legal Advice Helpline or me directly, and we'll be happy to help you. I need to skip on to IR35, because that's quite fundamental in the sector, and I need you to be aware of the changes that are coming to force, possibly next year. So the IR35 reforms for the private sector. So in October 2018, the government confirmed that they would extend the off-payroll rules into the private sector from next year, April. Now, the consultation was published in March, and the deadline closed last month. We, the REC, provided a response, and there's a link to that on the website if you want to have a look at that. And some of the amendments to the existing off-payroll rules are actually stated in the consultation document, and we expect draft legislation around July, so summer 2019. Do bear in mind, though, that government has confirmed that statutory payments and employment rights will not be affected by these changes. So what they're concentrating on really is IR35 and not statutory payments or employment rights. Now, the fundamental changes to the off-payroll rules in the private sector are as follows. The government proposes that the end user client will be responsible for making the IR35 status determination. That's the same in the public sector. And this must be done before the contract starts, so the worker knows exactly whether or not they fall within or outside, and whether or not the rules apply. Now, the private sector client must pass that status decision to the party it has the contract with, and that's typically you, the agency, and that information was moved down the supply chain. In addition, another change is that there's going to be something called a small business exemption. Now, this is not applicable to you, the agency, but it's to your client. So what government is proposing is that small businesses will be excluded from these new rules. And the definition of a small company is they're going to be used in the same definition in the Companies Act, which is as follows. A small company will be deemed to be a small company if they satisfy two or more of the following criteria. One, your turnover must not be more than 10.2 million, or your balance sheet should not be more than 5.1 million, or you shouldn't have more than 50 employees engaged by your company. So you have to fulfill two or more of those requirements to fall within the small companies exemption. Now, we, the REC, believe that this is going to be a significant administrative burden because our members are going to have to find out whether or not their clients fall within the small companies exemption. And government has actually estimated that 95% of end users will not need to comply with the off-payroll rules, but we'll wait to see whether that's an accurate percentage. And another complication is that it's not clear who's responsible for determining whether or not the end user hirer is a small company. And we've made very strong representations in the response to consultation around that point, because it's not fair for our members to be making that determination. It's for the client to do so and pass that information to you, the agency. Now, a key element in terms of the off-payroll rules is around liability. So government considers it necessary to legislate to ensure that the IR35 determination and the reasons for that determination are cascaded to all the parties in the labour supply chain. So you can see this very strange-looking diagram setting out what a traditional supply chain will look like. But I'll move on to the next slide to talk a little bit more about establishing liability. So in terms of liability will flow down the supply chain as each party fulfills its obligations. So liability initially rests with the party that has failed to fulfill its obligations, then it transfers back to agency one. So if you have a look at this slide, it starts off with the client, then agency one, agency two, agency three, the fee payer, the PSC. So every party in the supply chain is liable, and whereby anybody drops the ball by not passing or fulfilling their obligations, that's when liability will rest with that entity in the supply chain. Now, again, as I said, liability will rest with the party that failed to fulfill its obligations until those obligations are met. However, if HMRC is not able to collect any unpaid taxes due because the liable party ceases to exist, then liability will move back to agency one in the chain. And that could be you, the agency, and then ultimately the client becomes liable. Please also bear in mind that there's no personal liability for directors and office holders or associates of fee payers in the legislation. And if anything changes, obviously we'll let our members know. Now, another area that we want to bring to your attention is appealing a client's I-35 determination. This is something that was quite common in the public sector because we found a lot of contractors disputing the status determination and also wanting to know why and how the public sector clients arrived at that decision. So what government is proposing is that end clients will be responsible for creating their own internal system to handle IR35 status disagreements. And we, the REC, disagree with that fundamentally. We believe that it should be something that's neutral, independent and led by the government, because it's very unlikely that a client who makes the determination to turn around and say, oh, sorry, actually, I got that wrong. So would rather something that is managed by government, which would be a lot more fair for all the parties in the supply chain. Now, in terms of what you need to do and what your clients need to do, we understand the client knowledge about I-35 is quite low, and government is committed to some educational process, but we haven't really seen very much of that because we're doing a lot of I-35 seminars and we haven't seen enough well, we haven't seen sufficient knowledge about these changes. So clients really need to sit down and consider whether or not they fall within the small companies exemption, review their contractor workforce, perhaps look at the CES tool and see whether or not, they understand what's required. And then you agencies, you need to start talking to your clients about the changes, ensure that your clients have actually assessed their workforce, have a look at your payroll processes, and also consider the impact on other processes and costs. So make sure you do that review well before April next year. Now, just to finish off on 35, I thought it'd be useful for me to run through all the points that we raised following our engagement with our members in the consultation, just so that you know exactly, the representations that we made on behalf of members. We have pushed for the reforms to be delayed to at least April 2021, because we don't think it's enough time to give businesses time to put these proposals into effect next year. So we're pushing for a delay for April 2021. We believe that government should conduct a comprehensive impact assessment from the public sector reforms, just to see, if there are any things that they can learn from that. There shouldn't be a small companies exemption, because we believe that's going to add more complication. And if there is one, it's the client that should make that determination and pass that information to the agency. We also confirmed in our response that the clients must give reasons for their status determination at the same time as the status determination. That would hopefully minimize less challenge. HMRC should provide a template that clients can use to make the I-35 determination. Clients must bear liability for their supply chains. And again, the parties should rely on a statutory process managed by HMRC for any status challenges, and not one led by the client, but by HMRC. So tax is a very, very complex area. We appreciate that. We do have an I-35 hub on the legal on the website, and we have a lot of information on the legal guide. We'll be doing quite a lot of seminars around the country to educate our members on these proposals, and you're free to invite your clients. The next one is in Leeds, which is next week, and if you're happy to attend, please see the details there, book. And if you have any further questions on I-35, please feel free to email Chris or myself or Louina, who's actually leading I-35, and we'll be happy to respond to your questions.
So we are just about up on our hour for this first webinar. I'd like to thank everybody for attending and for listening. Of course, it will be available as a recording through a podcast version. The questions and answers will be available through a blog from Chris Hartley of the REC. If you have any further questions from today that you'd like covered, or think about when you've had time to think about and digest some of the slides that we've been through today and some of the comment, if you can, there's an email address on that final slide that will be sent out. The pack of slides will be sent out, but if you email chris.hartley@rec.uk.com, and we will endeavour to make sure that all questions get answered in full. Our next driver sector meeting will be on the 10th of September at the REC premises in London. And I'd like to close and thank you again for your attendance. Thank you.